Last time we met, we talked about the impact trade routes like Silk Roads and the Indian Ocean trade network had on world history. Not gonna lie, it was pretty exciting. Goods and religions traveling around the world, creating cool cities and new states. In fact, these trade routes are so important, this whole unit is called networks of exchange. So you may be wondering why we're gonna spend a significant amount of time today and a whole chapter in your textbook talking about an empire that wasn't an empire, but was an empire. It's, wait for it, the Mongols. Cue the Mongoltage. Da, 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 da. At least that's what John Green would say on Crash Course. But here, we need to consider why the Mongols were placed in this unit by the powers that be. And we'll kind of come around to that when we're done. So, are they the destroyer of worlds? The breaker of chains, if you're into Game of Thrones? Are they the exception? The reason gunpowder and the plague got to Europe? What about Islam to China? Are they responsible for creating an interconnected Eurasia while actually leaving no cultural or political mark of their own? It's difficult to say. Let's first talk about how it happened. In fact, some in the College Board might call this state building. When an outcast kid named Temujin lost his father and had to fight his way to the top of rival Mongol clans by his own willpower and his ability to make smart alliances to unite them, the path that Eurasia would take was drastically altered. So in 1206, Temujin was named the Great Khan, or Genghis in Persian, or Chinggis Khan in Mongolian. And he was named that at the Mongol tribal meeting, which was called a Kurultai. After this, he set off on a mission of expansion in order to keep his unified Mongol horde pushing the boundaries. When all was said and done, Chinggis and his sons and grandsons will build an empire that stretched from Korea, south down to China, west to Persia, and north to Russia. How did they do it? Well, military organization played a big role. Chinggis reorganized all of his people and the conquered people into battalions of 10,000, then down to 1,000, 100, and finally 10, shifting people around based on merit and making sure that people from the same captured towns were not in the same units in order to maintain their loyalty to him. Military discipline was rough. Desertion by one member would be death for everyone. Chinggis also made sure to build loyalty by maintaining the same social status as most of his people. He ate the same food and slept in the same style yurt that they did. Mongol tactics were unique as well. All males aged 50 to 70 served in the military, and that military was 100% cavalry. They would swarm an area, camp outside a walled city, threaten it for a few weeks, swarm away, and then when people started to come back outside, attack. They would offer complete incorporation and safety to those who surrendered and paid them tribute, and complete annihilation to those who didn't. Their light and mobile cavalry, primarily dependent on bows, could overwhelm an army of foot soldiers or even heavy metal-clad knights. In terms of running and maintaining the places they conquered, they also devised ingenious methods. We won't count the utter destruction of the Abbasid capital of Baghdad in that. They were not shy, for example, about moving people around the empire if they were qualified to perform a job that was better served somewhere else. Because they produced no commodities of their own, they supported merchants and streamlined trade routes. Their postal system, called the Yam, conveyed messages around the empire and was so effective that even Marco Polo commented on it, saying, "And at each of these stations used by the messengers, there is a large and handsome building for them to put up at, in which they find all the rooms furnished with fine beds and all other necessary articles in rich silk, and where they are provided with everything they could want. At some of these stations, moreover, there shall be posted some 400 horses standing ready, right, ready to continue them on their path." In terms of impacts on existing empires, we're going to look at two specific places, China on the one hand and Persia on the other. First off, it took 70 years and multiple Khans to finally put the Song dynasty out of its misery and to establish Mongol rule over the Middle Kingdom. In their defense, the Song dynasty was a shell of its former self, plagued by famines, civil unrest, and an invasion from a different nomadic group from the north, the Jurchens. So when Kublai Khan could declare himself emperor of the Yuan dynasty in 1279, he set out trying to convince the Chinese that he had in fact earned the mandate of heaven. The Mongols improved roads, reinforced the Grand Canal, lowered some taxes, supported scholars and agriculture, and embraced some aspects of Confucianism. Despite this, they remained very separate from Chinese society. Intermarriage was forbidden. They built a new capital at Beijing, ignored the examination system, and incorporated foreigners into their administration. Overall, it created a very short-lived and resented dynasty that was overthrown by the native Ming after the typical peasant rebellions, epidemics, and economic crises that indicated a loss of the mandate of heaven. In Persia, on the other hand, a very different approach was taken by the Mongols. The Mongol conquest of Persia, perpetrated first by Genghis himself, finished by his grandson Hulagu, was brutal and overwhelming, destroying the delicate irrigation system that had fertilized the Fertile Crescent and enriched empires dating back from the Persians all the way to the Abbasid Caliphs. They sacked the Persian capital of Baghdad in 1258, to where one Persian chronicler said, "In the Muslim countries devastated by Genghis Khan, not 1 in 1,000 of the inhabitants survived." It said that the river ran black with the ink of all of the books destroyed from the House of Wisdom, and the city of Baghdad would never recover. In other ways, the Mongols assimilated seamlessly into Persian culture, unlike in China. A majority of the Mongols who settled there converted to Islam, abandoning their shamanistic atheism, and intermarriage was so common that you basically couldn't tell where the Mongols left off and the Persians started. Besides the relatively short-lived Turkic warrior groups and the Safavid Empire that came later, the role in the Middle East, however, would forever be changed because of the Mongol invasions. Despite not leaving their own cultural mark on the landscape of Eurasia, the Mongols initiated a new era of interconnection and cultural blending that was really extraordinary. And they have recently undergone a historical renaissance when it comes to historiography and how we assess their impact. They've gone from being seen as the worst kind of villains, murdering and raping on an unprecedented scale, which they definitely did, to being the bearers of culture across the continent, to being the way that we should evaluate all historical phenomena and peoples, a deeply complex and nuanced group of people whose impact has yet to be fully unwrapped. We'll close with an excerpt from a really great book called Genghis Khan and the Making of the Modern World by Jack Weatherford. Quote, "The Mongols deliberately opened the world to a new commerce, not only in goods, but also in ideas and knowledge. The Mongols brought German miners to China and Chinese doctors to Persia. The transfers ranged from the monumental to the trivial. They spread the use of carpets everywhere they went and transplanted lemons and carrots from Persia to China, as well as noodles, playing cards, and tea from China to the West. They financed the building of Christian churches in China, Buddhist temples and stupas in Persia, and Muslim Quranic schools in Russia. The Mongols swept across the globe as conquerors, but also as civilization's unrivaled cultural carriers. The Mongols exercised a determined drive to move products and commodities around and to combine them in ways that produce entirely novel products and unprecedented invention. When their highly skilled engineers from China, Persia, and Europe combined the Chinese gunpowder with Muslim flamethrowers and applied European bell casting technology, they produced the cannon, and an entirely new arsenal of weapons, from pistols to missiles. While each item had some significance, the larger impact came in the way the Mongols selected and combined technologies to create unusual hybrids. The Mongols displayed a devoutly and persistently internationalist zeal in their political, economic, and intellectual endeavors. They sought not merely to conquer the world, but to institute a global order based on free trade, a single international law, and a universal alphabet with which to write all languages. Genghis Khan's grandson, Kublai Khan, introduced paper currency intended for use everywhere. The Mongols refined and combined calendars to create a calendar more accurate than any previous one, and they sponsored the most extensive maps ever assembled. So they're kind of a big deal, and that's why they're the exception.